My internet's been a little bit flaky, so if for any reason I disconnect, just ping me on Slack because I have my cell phone on the data, so
Okay.
I will know if you ping me on Slack, even if this internet goes off. So it's all good.
Sure. That's okay. Yeah.
Mm.
Ok, now we're live. E aí, galera, tudo bem? Beleza? Boa noite para todo mundo.
Beleza, boa noite.
Hum, Obrigado para todo mundo que está aqui online nessa nossa quinta-feira. Hoje o tempo está melhor do que durante essa semana, né? Em São Paulo, especificamente, estava chovendo, frio. Agora está mais tranquilo. E, galera, hoje a gente tem novamente o Warner com um assunto que vocês pediram demais, Synapse Analytics. Está todo mundo pedindo, todo mundo falando. Vitor, traz assunto sobre Synapse Analytics. Eu trouxe um cara que está fazendo uns projetos muito legais. Ninguém melhor que o Warner para compartilhar aí um pouco do que está acontecendo no Synapse Analytics com vocês. Eu já quero agradecer a todos vocês, pedir que se você puder, compartilhe aí a nossa live para chegar no máximo de pessoas possível. Vai ficar gravado, tá, no canal do YouTube, então vocês podem rever depois. Tá? E se você não está inscrito no canal, se inscreve aí agora, beleza? Sem mais, eu vou passar aí para o Warner. Hey, Warner, thank you again. It's always great to have you. Man, it's up to you. Just do your show, man.
Sounds good. All right, give me 1 second here, and I will start presenting. Gotta share my screen. All right, then you guys will be able to see. Share screen. Share screen. Share screen. Okay, let me see. Share. Let me know when you can see. Whoa,
Okay.
yeah, I can see. It's like
we can see
Inception.
It.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Hola, galera. So nice to be here again, presenting for the SQL Maniacs. So we're going to do an intro session today, getting started with Azure Synapse Analytics, like Vitor said, because I did understand that part. This is hot right now. Microsoft has Azure in public preview at the moment, and it's probably, in my guess, is that it's probably going to be announced to be generally available at Ignite coming up at the end of September. And just in case you don't know, I'll just do a little commercial here for Microsoft. Ignite this year is going to be 100% virtual, 100% free. So it's very nice because a lot of people said, oh man, I really wish I could have attended an Ignite conference. It's expensive, you have to travel. The conference is expensive. Well, it's going to be 100% virtual, 100% free this year. Last year, I did see they posted a lot of the recordings, a lot of the material is there on the Ignite. But this year, it's all going to be virtual. So it's going to be really cool. I expect a lot of Synapse stuff to be at Ignite as well. So I'm not going to bore you two guys too much because I've shared quite a bit of evenings with you. But if you never see me here around the SQL Maniacs, I been working with the Microsoft space of databases for 13 years now, the last few years. Lots of stuff in Azure, obviously. I have also worked in Python for other cloud providers. So I've done projects in AWS and GCP as well. And yeah, I'm a colleague of Vitor's over at Python. I'm a Microsoft Data Platform MVP as well. Feel free to reach out to me at any of those contact points you see on the screen. Now, before you get freaked out and say, well, I just want to see the thing, I want just demos, give me demos. It's just a few slides, and then we'll jump right away into the demos. Because I know these getting started type of showcase presentations, people just don't want to sit through a lot of slides. So we'll go through this quick, and we'll just jump right into just showing you what is Synapse. So again, objective, we're going to do an overview, a guided tour of the current status of Synapse, because again, it's in preview. So we don't know, things might change by it goes GA. Even after it goes GA, they still change things all the time on all their services, right? So it's a beginner session. I'm just going to talk a little bit about what Synapse is, show it to you guys, hopefully get everybody excited. So I'm going to go over the workspace, a little bit of the SQL on demand, which is the new SQL engine that's inside Synapse, and Spark, and some of the other integrations like the Data Factory integration and the Cosmos integration, which I think is really cool. So we'll see that as well. Prerequisites, really, to just understand the value of Synapse, you just have to have basic experience working with BI and maybe a little bit of knowledge of warehousing and big data, but not even like lots of practical knowledge. Just to know what it is enough to appreciate what Synapse is doing. All right, so let's talk about why Synapse. What's the value proposition of Synapse? So these are the challenges with BI projects, right? First, there's way too much data nowadays and it keeps getting bigger. Second, it's all over the place, tons of different sources. Third, users want everything more. They want more and more data, and they want it faster, right? They want to see insights, charts, dashboards quicker. And users also want more interactivity. So if you guys compare, for example, something like reporting services to something like Power BI or Tableau or Looker or any of these next-gen reporting or dashboarding tools, everything is interactive, everything's responsive, right? And then on top of all of that, we also have to think and always keep in mind security, very important. It doesn't matter if you have all these beautiful things properly architected and the reports look like a Cadillac. If you get hacked, you're still going to lose your job. So what is the solution that Microsoft has for these challenges in the data space? Well, Microsoft is betting on technology, advanced technology, cool technology like the SQL MPP engine, obviously like Spark, which is now the de facto standard for big data. But the magic sauce is the really tight tool integration, the workspace that they've built where you can do SQL, you can do big data, you can do ETL, you can visualize everything, all your artifacts all in one place. That's where I think the magic sauce is that really gives value to the product. So Synapse is a new service, bundles an entire data engineering experience in one workflow, one screen, right? You don't have to leave the Synapse workspace to get all your work done, right? So this is the workspace. The workspace sits on top of Data Lake Storage Gen 2. And then you have Spark pools and SQL pools, and there's different type of SQL pools. I'll go through that in a little bit. These Spark pools and SQL pools can access the data lake storage as well. And the SQL pools can also access dedicated SQL storage. And then on top of that, you have Data Factory embedded in the workspace. And then you also have the ability to boot up Power BI directly in the workspace as well. Okay. And it's not just Power BI, though. I want to make that really, really clear. The Synapse workspace exposes the SQL pools and the Spark pools just like any other SQL Data Warehouse cluster or like any other big data Spark cluster. So you can use third-party tools too. It's not locked into Power BI in any way. You can connect Tableau, you can connect Looker, you could connect Alteryx if you wanted. Any of these new next-gen data analytics tools, you can connect to the Spark pool or the SQL pool if you wanted to as well, okay? So that's it. That's all I have for slides. So I told you guys I was going to go into the demo real quick. So let's jump into that. So hopefully you guys can see my workspace right now. If nobody says anything, I assume that you can. So this is the home page of the workspace, and it immediately gives you a look at the most common tasks that a data engineer would do, right? We have ingest, explore, and then we have analyze and visualize. Okay, and then it also, if you've been playing around with your workspace, it will give you the most recent artifacts that you've interacted with, as well as you can pin if you want. See, I have a Cosmos notebook pinned so that your favorite documents or artifacts, you can just have them here pinned and you don't have to be chasing them around every time that you want to do something. Okay, now I'm going to walk you guys through all these capabilities that are here on the side. So let's see. There's data, develop, orchestrate, monitor, and manage. So let's walk through all this. Especially, let's start with data, okay? Okay, first, now that you guys can see here, let me publish this. So publish is basically save, because all of this is saved in the cloud, right? So I was working on this notebook earlier today, so I'm gonna save it here. But normally, you start here with this area. You guys saw it's tabs, but you start with this area totally clean, right? And now we see some of the initial concepts of Synapse, right? Some of the initial concepts of Synapse. Data, there's two categories right here, workspace and linked. So the workspace data is data that is tied directly to the Synapse workspace. For example, you guys can see here, I have a SQL pool, and I have SQL on demand, and I have 3 Spark databases, okay? SQL pool is basically what was known as SQL Data Warehouse. And this has its own dedicated SQL storage. And that uses SQL Server. It uses MDF files, it uses transaction log files. It has SSDs, basically premium storage under the covers. If you start this up and you don't run any queries, you're still paying for it. All right, so that's something that's very important to know. If you start it up as well, even if you just write 1 gig of data, Microsoft bills at 1 terabyte increments. So you're going to be paying for at least 1 terabyte. Even if you just start it up and you don't actually fill it up with 1 terabyte, you're going to pay for 1 terabyte to begin with. So SQL, the actual dedicated SQL pool, if you're just dealing with smaller amounts of data, is not necessarily what you want to use. If you're going to do 1 terabyte plus, then this is the engine that's going to give you the fastest performance. Okay, at least that's my experience. So this is going to be the one that gives you the fastest performance, but that one is a dedicated resources cluster where if you start it up and you don't do anything, you're still paying for it. Okay, SQL on demand is a little bit different. It's also SQL Server and it also runs T-SQL, but it doesn't do SQL storage. SQL on demand uses Azure Data Lake Gen 2. Okay, so SQL on demand does not have its own set of storage attached to it. It uses Azure Data Lake Gen 2 and can read files from Azure Data Lake Gen 2. That recommendation is for you to be using Parquet files to get the best performance. Parquet obviously being compressed. Parquet is also columnar. So if a particular query only needs a specific set of columns, the engine can pull them out of the Parquet file without reading the entire file. So that's a really cool feature of the Parquet files. So this is SQL on demand, and it uses a concept called external tables to do this. So when you're writing the T-SQL, you don't really have to know that you're using an external table, okay? You just write select star from table name, but when you define it, you have to say it's an external table and give it a path in the Azure Data Lake storage, okay? And we'll look into a script just to show you guys what that looks like. And then the Spark piece, well, it's just you have to have your Spark cluster running, right? So for example, you see the SQL pool. I don't have it running right now. So if I try to see, oh, I wonder what tables I have here. I want to open this. It's all a bunch of X's because this is not running right now, right? So it's not able to read the metadata. Now SQL on demand, just like the name says, if I try to query anything from it, it will wake up on its own and run the query. And I will get charged by CPU seconds running that query, okay? If I'm not running any queries, SQL on demand does not charge you anything. All you're paying for is for the storage of your Parquet files in your data lake storage, okay? So if you are, this is especially for people that are just learning, I always found, and again, this is my personal opinion, but I always found that it was hard to get people to just try to play around and learn Azure SQL Data Warehouse, because the moment that you started a cluster, it would start to bill you for all the resources, and you could pause the cluster, but the storage was still being charged while you had the cluster paused. So every day that you had that cluster paused because you were just learning, let's say after work you wanted to play around with it and learn a little bit, all that storage was being charged for you. I believe 1 terabyte of storage of DW is charged at about $300 a month. So we're talking about, you know, $10 a day more or less for running that DW cluster. Even if you, let's say that day you didn't get a chance to play around with it because you were too busy from work, just because you had that storage allocated, you already had to pay $10 that day, right? So I felt that was a really big barrier to learning and experimenting. Whereas now with Synapse, the SQL on demand is great. It does not charge you if you're not actively querying at all you're going to pay is for the data lake storage. And the data lake storage is very cheap compared to the actual premium SQL DW storage, right? So I find that this engine, the SQL on demand engine, is great for just learning Synapse, playing around with it, with external tables, how to load with Polybase, and do all sorts of cool things, and just pay for each query. I find that really, really cool. Spark, same thing. So you can browse if you want. I think I have my cluster running. And if at some point the cluster might get a little bit slower to boot up again, is because my Spark cluster is set to auto turn off. So if I am not doing or running any jobs or notebooks on the Spark cluster, after 15 minutes, I set it to 15 minutes, I'll show you guys what that looks like in configuration, it will turn off by itself, okay? Now, another cool thing about Synapse, you guys see here, when you go over an artifact, you get the 3 dots that say actions. And these actions are all contextual, right? So you see, if I go into a table in a SQL on demand, I get a new SQL script action. But if I go here into the action of a Spark, I get a new notebook action. So that's pretty neat, right? And then sometimes it gives you other options too, like new notebook, load to data frame. So maybe they'll put more options here later. Again, this is in preview, but if you see here for a table, it says new SQL script, and you can do a select of the top 100 rows, right? All that to say is that there is some contextual information built into the GUI. Now, the other cool thing about Synapse is that you can have linked data, okay? So you guys see here, for example, I have Azure Cosmos DB linked. I have my storage account linked. That's the data lake storage that I use for Synapse. And I have data sets. These data sets are the data sets that I define that I can use with my basically the data factory that's embedded into the Synapse workspace. Okay, so this is another common question. People say like, okay, but what is inside Synapse? Am I gonna be having to learn another ETL tool from Microsoft? Like I already know SSIS, then I started to learn Azure Data Factory, and now I have to learn the tool that comes inside Synapse? No, it's all okay. Don't worry about it. It's Azure Data Factory. Okay, so I will show you guys in a little bit, but basically it's just an Azure Data Factory workspace embedded inside the Synapse workspace. If you've been learning Azure Data Factory, then it's great. You right away, you know how to use the ETL part of Synapse. It's just Azure Data Factory. Okay, so you can see we have data sets here as well. So what this means though, what is really cool is that you can query and analyze all sorts of other services that are not necessarily just the SQL pools or the Spark pools, right? So for example, Cosmos DB, right? I don't have I don't have to go out into a different blade on Cosmos DB. See, for example, it has a full-blown actions integrated into this table that I have. Well, I guess it's technically a document collection in Cosmos DB, and it will generate the notebook for me based on that Cosmos DB container. So that I thought is really cool as well, because it basically means you can go into your Synapse workspace, and maybe you think of an Azure SQL DB that you have that you want to also kind of write some scripts right here. You don't have to switch out into a different tool or anything. You can add it as a linked service, and off you go. Okay, so that's pretty neat. Then when we do onto development, you can do SQL scripts. You guys see here. You can do notebooks. You can do data flows. The only thing that I find that is really missing right now here is that there is no way to organize these. So I hope that maybe in the next few months they're going to allow you to create folders, because it's really hard. I mean, I only have a few because I've only been playing around with it for a little bit, and obviously I use it for demos and whatnot. But imagine if you had like, I don't know, 40, 50 notebooks, 40 SQL scripts. I mean, how many of you guys have that amount of scripts or notebooks in your own work environment. Probably many of you have that many, right? And then you're just going to have them all flat without any organization in folders or subfolders. Like it's not a good experience, right? So hopefully they'll bring in the some ability to organize them. Okay, so that would be really neat. All right, so Orchestrate, then this is where you can create pipelines. Okay, if you create a pipeline, it basically just gives you a canvas. This is exactly the same ADF canvas. All right, the same as if you were to go into an Azure Data Factory. All right, so that's the pipeline. Close and discard. And same as Data Factory, it also has the copy data wizard. So if all you want to do is just to bring data in from somewhere else, you can just do copy data, follow the wizard, and that's it. Off you go. It'll create the pipeline for you and it'll execute it, and then you get your data in. I thought I don't have it here right now because I ran it too many days ago, but I will tell you just to get an idea. I will tell you when I set up this workspace, when it became public preview a couple of months ago, I copied about 1 terabyte of data in just to play around with it, and it was pretty good performance. So I copied from, I believe it was from Central US that I had 1 terabyte of data in a storage account over to East US where I have this workspace, and 1 terabyte copied in about 55 minutes, which I thought it was pretty good. Because I mean, how often would you be copying 1 terabyte to do ETL? Not that often, right? Maybe the initial seeding of the data, you would copy 1 terabyte, and just 55 minutes, that's pretty good performance. Now, obviously, it wasn't coming from like an on-premises connection to the cloud, right? It was going from one Azure region to another Azure region. So that's also why performance was that good, I guess. But I still thought it was pretty good performance. So this is Orchestrate, right? Now let's go into Monitor. So Monitor here allows you to have some visibility over what's happening in your workspace, right? So you see here, there's pipeline runs, there's trigger runs. I'm going to talk about what a trigger is in a little bit. And then there's integration runtimes. Integration runtimes are basically the Azure Data Factory engines, right? So you see here, you can have an Azure integration runtime. In this case, I just use an Azure integration runtime because I run all my resources in Azure. But if you're mixing your workspace with resources on premises, for example, then you can have what is called as a self-hosted integration runtime. And the way that works is basically you have to download a VM, you run a VM on premises, the VM registers itself to your Azure Synapse workspace, and then you'll be able to see it here. And that way, that would allow you to, for example, if you have a SQL Server on-prem, if that integration runtime, the VM that you put it on premises, can see that SQL Server, then that integration runtime will act basically as like a proxy or a middleman between your SQL Server on premises and your Synapse workspace. Okay. There's other things you can do here. So, for example, if you ran something on the Spark cluster, you'll see the applications show up here. Applications in this case being my notebook. If you do SQL requests, right now, if you see here, there's a little information thing that says the request history is coming soon. For now, only running requests are visible. So there's a gap here. Maybe they'll cover it soon when they go in GA. We'll see. Because obviously what we want is to eventually have the whole history of queries, not just for troubleshooting or debugging, because eventually maybe you want to do some auditing, see what people are actually querying on the SQL on demand engine, and that's just not there right now. Okay. And then there's this active data flow debug, and basically what you can do is once you are running a data flow, you can set it to be a debug session, so you can stop on particular steps of the data flow and whatnot, and see the status, and you will be able to see them here if anybody was doing a data flow debug session. Okay. And then finally here we go on manage. So manage is where you get all the other different resources that live in the pool, more like the compute or the configuration type of resources. For example, if I go first here on SQL pools, we see I got my SQL on demand, and I got my SQL pool. That's called the get started SQL. There's the reason why it's called Get Started SQL is when you sign up for the workspace, it actually asks and says, hey, do you want to set up a demo SQL pool? We're going to call it Get Started SQL. We're going to load a little bit of sample data on it for you. And, I said yes, and it created it, whatever. But you don't have to. You could just have SQL on demand if you wanted to and save yourself the most money as possible. Something interesting here as well, SQL on demand is online because it's always online, right? If I want to query it, it'll just work, right? SQL pool, you have to actually start it up. See, there's a play button right here. And right now it's paused because I don't want to pay for it. Something else that's interesting, like tells us a little bit about the service, is that SQL on demand is just auto sizing. Size, there's no size to pick. It's just auto size. Whereas my SQL pool is just the DW100. The C is because of its compute, which is basically the second generation of the SQL Data Warehouse engine. What does it mean that it's auto? Eh? People have this question all the time. Say, what do you mean auto? Well, basically, it just means that right now, when you run a SQL on-demand query, your resources get allocated automatically based on what the SQL on-demand optimizer thinks is the cost of your query. So there is no way to say, hey, I want more resources. If your query, let's say, for example, takes 10 seconds, and you already optimized your Parquet files, so you have them in good sizes, 10 megs to 250 megs. They're already compressed, obviously. They're columnar. Your columns have nice compression. You have them in a nice partition way, etc., etc. All the optimizations that you can do with Parquet. Then if you, let's say, have a query that runs in 10 seconds, there's nothing you can do after that because you can't increase your compute. Not right now. Eventually, I think what they're going to do is that you're going to be able to put some sort of multiplier, because this is what Bigquery does. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with Google. Well, obviously you're familiar with Google, but you might not be familiar with Bigquery, right? But Bigquery, basically what it does is that if you run a query without specifying anything, it'll do the same thing. It'll estimate a cost, and it'll give you a baseline, let's call that baseline, a 1x of resources. And let's say a 1x of resources, you got it in 10 seconds. Well, Bigquery allows you to say, okay, whatever the cost that was that you gave me this, resource allocation, now I want you to give me 2x. And obviously the expectation or the desire here is that if I go 2x, then this is going to take 5 seconds. And then if I want to do a 4x, I don't remember where it stops, maybe at 12x or something like that. But if I want to do a 4x, then at that point, right, we want the query to take 2.5 seconds. So this is the model that BigQuery has for its pay-per-query engine, right? BigQuery is a pay-per-query engine. And this is the model that it uses. So right now, Synapse doesn't do that. It's just auto, and that's all you get. So the auto will be the equivalent to this 1x. Maybe down the line, what they'll allow is, I believe, maybe just to be on par with the competition, is that maybe they'll start allowing multipliers, right? 2x or 4x. Obviously, once you set a multiplier that's higher than 1x, you pay more per CPU second, right? Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, now Spark pools, you can create more than one Spark pool. Basically, a Spark pool just means a big data cluster. Now, you guys can see here, I can refresh this and I still can't add a new one right now. I don't know if it's just limited to my account, because my account is an MVP account that we get basically credits sponsored by Microsoft. So I don't know if it's because of that, or if it's because of right now they're really being really cautious with all the resources they're giving away, or the resources that people are consuming for the public preview, especially with how popular the service has become. So you can only create one cluster at the moment. That's my whole point, right? The new is grayed out, but it's okay. I mean, one cluster at the moment is enough. I mean, I would say it's enough even for many clients. They don't run multiple Spark clusters. They just run one cluster. But for learning, demo, test, it's definitely more than enough. But you can still size it, right? So I'll show you guys here what the sizing looks like. The workspace. and packages. Okay, so I'll show you here from the beginning. So you can see here, auto scale, I have it disabled for this cluster. The node size is a small, quote unquote small, because I think it's pretty good. It's 4 vCPUs with 32 gigs of RAM. I have 3 nodes in this cluster, and I have auto pause enabled, like I said. So it's 15 minutes idle. The reason why I have that enabled, obviously, is because if I forget, I'm playing around with it, or I'm doing a presentation, and then I forget to actually turn it off at the end of my session, I don't want to pay for an idle Spark cluster. With 3 nodes and 4 vCPUs and 32 gigs of RAM, at the end of the day, I'll end up paying a lot of money if I forget and I just leave it running. So I do have it set to 15 minutes idle. You can set it lower. You can actually disable it completely if you don't want auto pause. So if you're using a cluster that you want up 24/7 because you have Spark jobs running all day, every day, or you have data scientists that are working 24/7 as well, then you can run it forever if you want. You have to pay for it, obviously. Right, and there's the different versions that are installed in this particular cluster: the version of Spark, version of Python, Scala, Java, .NET Core, .NET for Apache, and the Delta Lake. There's the workspace information, and you can also upload an environment config file, right? So basically what this does is if you are missing, or if the Microsoft Spark, the one that they preload in the cluster, is missing a package that you want to use in your Spark jobs, then you can just upload it, upload the configuration to the cluster. So when the cluster starts, it'll run an update through the package manager, all right? And then it'll download whatever package it is that you wanted. Okay, cool. And then I'll show you guys here the auto scale. As you guys can see, I have it turned off right now because I don't want it to auto scale. I don't want it to get bigger without me saying anything. See, it says here, it says if enabled, the pool will automatically scale up and down based on the amount of activity. For my demo purposes, I don't want it to do that, so I just have it disabled. You can see here the node size. I'll show you guys that right now. Right now, there's 3 different node sizes. Hopefully you can see. There we go. Small, medium, and large. So 4, 8, and 16 vCPUs, 32, 64, 128 gigs of RAM. That's a lot. So it's pretty good, pretty beefy if you need it. And the number of nodes they're allowing right now goes all the way from 3 to 200 nodes. That's a lot of nodes. That will be able to crunch a lot of data. I just have it set to 3. That way, even if I'm playing around with it for a whole afternoon, it's just 2.6 Canadian dollars per hour for the whole cluster, right? I'm just going to cancel this. Now, external connections, this is where you define those linked services that I was talking about. So you can see here, for example, I have some blob storage that I connected to because I used it in a pipeline. I have an Azure SQL database that I used in a pipeline. I have that Cosmos DB that I linked to. Actually, I used it in a notebook. And then I have this Azure Synapse Analytics, formerly SQL DW. That's a basically the SQL DW engine that is linked as part of the workspace. That's an internal config. You don't have to do anything actually. When you create the workspace, if you create a SQL pool, that's going to create it for you anyway. And then there's that Data Lake Storage Gen 2 account. When you create the workspace as well, you can create a new Data Lake Storage to be the new default, or you can use an existing one. And then it just basically links it to the workspace. Okay. Now, there's a couple of things here that are part of ADF as well. In case you are not familiar, I'm going to show you. And it is that you can set triggers to execute a pipeline, right? So if you're not familiar with, this is an ADF feature, but again, this is now embedded and kind of like merged or blended into Synapse, right? So you can have different types of trigger. You can have either, I'm going to go right here. You can have a schedule, you can have a tumbling window of time, or you can have an event, right? So schedule obviously just triggers at exactly a particular time. A tumbling window goes over, a 5-minute window, 10-minute window, so on. Or you can have an event. Now, the most interesting one here, or the one that people, everybody knows what the schedule is. Event is the one that's a little bit more new, or that is not as common and people, sometimes implement. So if you see here, event, what it does is that you have to set an Azure storage account, and you give it the container name of the storage account, and then you can give it the wildcards for blob paths. Okay, so a blob path will begin with something or ends with something, and then you can select the event, whether the blob was created or the blob was deleted that you want to trigger that event. So if a blob, for example, you say, let's say I have a table that goes into the lake storage, and this is table 1, so that's going to be my container name in my data lake storage. And then blob path begins with, I don't know, let's say this is Monday. So the files are called Monday underscore table 1, I don't know, on some dates or something like that. Yeah, maybe the time or something. Anyway, anytime that a new Monday file comes in, then you can set the event to trigger on blob created, and then trigger a pipeline, and then the pipeline can go in, find the file, and run your pipeline to actually load it, right? Makes sense. So that's one way to do it. Cool. And then if you have deleted as well. So I guess delete is just in case you want to trigger a pipeline. If a particular job, somebody pulled the data away from a file, or a file got purged, and you want to register it somewhere, well, you can do that as well. Okay. I'm going to discard this, and I'm going to save it, obviously. All right. And then the other thing is the same. This is, I spoke about the integration runtime, the engine of ADF. Then the other thing here is just security. So you do have access control. I'll show you guys here. There's not a lot of roles right now, but I mean, it's enough for now. You have workspace admin, a SQL admin, or a Spark admin, right? So either you can do everything by being the workspace admin, or you can work only with SQL engines, or you can work only with the Apache Spark part of the workspace, right? So, and these are, again, for administration of the actual workspace on Synapse, right? If you just wanted somebody to, let's say, for example, connect to the SQL on-demand database and do something, then you can just give them a SQL account, right? You can create a SQL account for them and let them connect through whatever. You could use Management Studio, right? They don't really need to use the workspace in that scenario. So this is for people that are going to actually be working here in the workspace, okay? But it's not, does not necessarily mean that it's the same as just giving access to the SQL database themselves, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. All right, just gonna cancel that. And then there's finally one last thing here. It's called Manage Private Endpoints. This is a network security feature inside Azure. Basically what it does is that it gives you a private endpoint to connect to 2 different cloud services. So those endpoints don't get exposed through the internet, and then they also don't get routed through the internet. Even if you're inside the Azure data center, it will not go routed through a route that Azure uses for internet traffic, right? So that's what that's what a private endpoint is. In this case, these get created automatically by Synapse when you create the workspace. So you can see this is a SQL engine and a SQL on-demand engine. And the reason why this is because the clusters that Microsoft uses for SQL and SQL on demand are not provisioned in the same network that your Synapse workspace is provisioned, right? So what they do is they provision the Synapse workspace in a virtual network that you specify, and you just get the Synapse workspace inserted in there. And then they set up private endpoints between that and the actual clusters where your SQL on demand and your other SQL live. And that way, that communication between your workspace and the SQL part of your workspace is completely private, and it doesn't go through Azure Internet Routing, right? So that's where this is coming from. For the most part, though, it works. You don't have to touch it. You don't have to do anything with it. It's just you have access to see it here. You can actually create more if you want to create a managed private endpoint from your workspace into another service in Azure. You don't have to. If your service is exposed through a public endpoint, like some of mine are, right? Like I linked all these services here because I have them exposed to a public endpoint, then I don't have to create a private endpoint for them. I can just create it directly right here, okay? So woof, that's a lot, eh? Just to go through that user interface. Now let's go back into develop. I'm just gonna show you guys real quick some of the actual user experience of running things and the interface for it. So let's start with just simply the SQL on demand. So SQL on demand, I'm going to walk through here. The process is you have to create a master key. The reason for that is that then you have to create a credential to basically connect from Synapse, the engine that's running here, into your data lake storage. So as long as you say, just use the managed identity, this is going to work, okay? And then create an external data source. So here I'm creating a data source that is tied to my Synapse data lake. So you can see here it says Warner Data Lake.dfs.core, Windows Net, Synapse. And actually, there's embedded into the workspace a data browser. So if I go here, oh, it's not here, it's linked. A storage account, you guys can see here. I'll be able to see the contents of that account. See, it says right here, Synapse, it's my primary container for my data lake storage tied to this workspace. And it opens this data explorer right there on the workspace. And I can just, use it just like any other cloud data explorer. For example, I have some data here from HammerDB. If you've never used HammerDB, it's a pretty cool benchmarking tool. So, I have a bunch of really big files. This is where I copied like almost 1 terabyte of data. So I have, a part supplier, transactions. Each one of these files is 43 gigs. I generated them with HammerDB. So quick shout out to HammerDB if you've never used it. It's a pretty neat tool. But yeah, so this you can browse. So once you have all this security stuff set up, then it's when you can start doing stuff against the data lake. One last thing here, you have to set up file formats so that the SQL engine knows what type of file to expect. So very common, for example, I had a delimited with a pipe. So I just created a format called pipe delimited. I created a parquet format. And then this is where, you actually define the table. So you create an external table. So it's not a table that's going to live inside a SQL storage. That way, the SQL engine knows that this is going out, right? And said the data source is Synapse. And then the location is that HammerDB folder and just a file called nation_1.tbl. And it is a pipe delimited file, right? And let me see if I have it actually available. I haven't run this in a while. Oh, there we go. So it did work. Cool. So this is on demand, right? So I don't have to start the cluster. I don't have to do anything. I just select the query, boom, I'm going. Okay, that's really cool. Something else to see here in the interface as well. Once you have the data, you can export the results. You can export results as CSV, JSON, XML, and you can also have a graphical view of the results, very similar to what you get if you have been using Azure Data Studio, for example, right? You're probably familiar with this. The Azure Data Studio comes integrated with a chart, and you can select what you want, right? If you want the legend to be something, one of the particular fields, let's say I just want the country name and the category. I mean, I don't know what I would want here. The comments, different comments for different country names. I don't know. Legend. All right, so you can put here something, right? Something or other, right? And same thing here, something again. So if you just want to throw in a quick chart over the results, you can do that. And then you can just save it, and it gives you the option of saving the image, the JPEG, a PNG, or an SVG vector file. Okay. Obviously, this experience here is nothing compared to the actual full-blown experience of Power BI, but if you're just doing something simple, you just want to, get a quick chart, save it as an image, shoot it up in an email, then, it's good for that. That's not a big deal. Cool. And also see here, let's go back to the results. Yeah, same thing here. If I was using the other engine, I could see the query plan. I don't think I can see the query plans inside this, inside the SQL on demand engine. You can see here, for example, if I say once a table is defined, like I define this external table nation, then you can use it just like any other table. So for example, I can create a view, right? So it says create view s_nation as the select star from nation where basically the country names that start with S, right? But notice that after I define external table, I just have to refer to it by name, just like any other table. And then you can create views on it. You could create a store procedure that uses it, a UDF, anything that you wanted to, you could. So if I run this now, this should work. Yeah, there we go. So there was only one in there, Saudi Arabia. Okay, cool. So that's the develop experience for SQL scripts. I'm going to show you real quick the develop experience for the Spark piece. So this is more like a classic notebook. So if you have used notebooks in any of the different Spark distributions, maybe you use Jupyter with like an HD Insight cluster or like Cloudera cluster, or you're using it with Databricks and you like the Databricks embedded notebooks, well, this is a very similar experience. You have the cells that you can add text to it in the code, and then you can just run queries, right? So for example, here, I can just go ahead. I want to use the Yelp database, and if I don't have an active Spark session, it's going to start it for me. Now we'll see how long that takes. This is why sometimes the auto pause comes back to bite me when I'm presenting, because if it's been 15 minutes since the last time we used that Spark cluster, then it just got spun down, and then when you have to come back and you press start, you don't have to actually go into the other screen to start it. It'll automatically start it, but then you have to wait for it to be done, right? So that's the only thing that always happens. So let's see if it'll start. I'm just using this use Yelp. So basically the Yelp database that I already have here, right? Remember, if you guys go to workspace, right, I have this Yelp database here. We'll see how long that takes. Okay, well, while that's going on, I'll show you guys then the other thing that you can develop, which is the data flows, right? And I have a data flow already created. I'll just show you real quick. This is exactly the same experience that you get into the data flows when you're working with ADF. Now, obviously here in this is just like a getting started with Azure Synapse session. So I'm not going to dive into the ADF portion, into what it's actually doing, but just to keep in mind, everything is embedded in here in the experience inside the Synapse workspace, including the graphical drag and drop of creating data flows as well, right? And it's a very neat type of experience. You just have to add the sources, then you can add an operator. In this case, it's a lookup, right? So I'm going to here, and then it comes here and does a lookup to here, and then it continues on through the pipeline. Very, very, very similar to what you guys will be doing with SSIS. Anybody that is already really experienced with SSIS can pick up ADF really, really quick. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. And if you have never picked up an ETL tool at all, I would say ADF is not bad. It's not a bad one to pick up, because all of them have very similar concepts. And if you learn one of them, you probably will be able to, be dangerous in all of them, I would say. Okay. Did this finish the Yelp workbook? Oh my goodness, it's still running. I'm not gonna stop it. I'm gonna let it keep going because might as well right now. But yeah, so that's the reason why. The only thing, sometimes I actually forgot to turn off the auto pause before this session. Sometimes at the beginning of the session I turn off the auto pause so that this doesn't happen, because then you have to wait a few minutes for it to spin up the cluster up again. So That's the only kind of annoying thing about it. But other than that, it's okay. Yeah, so that's pretty much it from the sense of what Synapse allows you to do. One other thing, I guess I would want to show once wait for the cluster to spin up is there's a really cool integration, and it is that you can actually go into a SQL on demand and you can do selects. Like for example, select open star from Yelp.dbo. What's the name of my Yelp table? Reviewed underscore businesses. Businesses. Let's see if this runs. If as long as the cluster is up. Yeah. No. All right. It looks actually. Oh, it looks like it is finally. Good. Yeah, it did go. Okay. So this is kind of neat. So okay, let's see if this will work now. Hopefully it works. Yeah, nice, it worked. So now I can go back into the notebook and show you guys. So this is the Spark notebook. It takes a bunch of different files. I just run some select, materialize the table. So you guys see here at the very end, if you guys see here, for example, I'm creating a data frame called reviews. And again, if you're not familiar with Spark, a data frame is basically kind of like a table variable on SQL Server, right? It's a table that will live in the Spark memory space of the cluster, and you have to give it a schema, and then you can populate it, and then you can do stuff with it, right? The data frame, you can then transform it, you can filter it, you can materialize it into storage, you can materialize it into the Spark database properly, and so on, right? So I created this data frame called reviewed businesses through just running a spark.sql command. And here it's just vanilla SQL, right? And then once I have that data frame defined, I do a data frame.write save as a table, and it just gets materialized right here into the Spark Yelp database, and this is the name of the table, right? Fair enough. Now the cool thing that I just did right here is that there's an integration here behind the scenes between this SQL portion and the Spark portion, right? So you guys can see here, I was able to basically just use a 3-part name to query a Spark table from the SQL runtime, right? So I use the Spark database name, I use the DBO schema, and then I use the name of the table, and that way it just automatically goes into the Spark cluster without, I didn't set this up, by the way. I didn't create anything like create external database, set credentials, blah, blah, blah. I didn't do anything like that. Simply works, right? And this again is what I mean when I say that there's a magic sauce. The magic sauce is the integration between all these things together, right? The notebooks, the scripts, the runtimes, the fact that I can query Spark tables directly from my SQL, the integration with the data lake storage. I can just go in here. I can look at my data lake storage files. I'm still here in that same environment where I'm developing. I can go here, play with my scripts. I can go here, create my pipelines, so on, right? So this is where the magic of Synapse happens, all right? So let me just finish up, and then we'll do the Q&A. Okay. Hopefully I gave you guys a good overview of everything that's in the workspace right now, right? Like I said, this is more of a getting started showcase type of session. Not really a super deep dive, right? But I hope you got a good idea, right? Synapse is a tightly integrated environment of different services. But again, the idea is that you're going to use them all together all the time. So you might as well put them all into one space of work and integrate them really good. So there's seamless movement and transition between SQL and Spark, right? You have SQL and Spark in the same graphical interface. You can have SQL tabs and Spark notebooks in the same interface. And you can even query those Spark tables as well, right? There's new concepts in the Synapse workspace, like SQL on demand. This is a new way to query SQL. So that's something cool. It's a brand new actual feature that is on SQL on demand. And it makes it really easy to get up and running without having to make a lot of architecture decisions. So you don't have to decide, oh, I wonder if I should go with a SQL MPP engine, or I should go with SQL database instead, or if I should just go with SQL database but only use a particular feature like hyperscale, or if I should just go with SQL Data Warehouse, but I don't want to spend money on storage, so I'm just going to use Polybase to do external tables that way. Okay, no, you don't have to worry about that. You can either use a SQL pool, or if you don't want to use SQL pools at all, just use SQL on demand. It takes away that decision, right? You don't have to make a lot of decisions about it. You don't have to decide into like, oh, I wonder how many flavors of Spark I want. Do I want to configure it this way or that way? Like, no, don't worry about it. Just create a Spark pool, get up and running. If you need a custom package, just set it up in the config file. The rest, just leave the defaults. Go ahead, just start, right? So it makes it really easy to just simply create the workspace, and immediately you're up and running with a very robust set of tools that will fit 99% of the use cases. And when it doesn't, you have ways to customize it as well, okay? Now, you guys are gonna have to bear with me for a minute. I just want to advertise here. If you are interested, you want to see more of the actual, all the details, the step-by-step, how we work at Pythian creating some of these data solutions. We've been working with SQL Data Warehouse for a few years now, and now it's just morphing into Synapse opportunities. I am going to be teaching a full day class at the end of the year, November 31st, December 1st. This is a conference run by a great group of MVPs and regional directors in India called Data Platform Summit, but because of COVID, they're running it virtual this year, so they're doing it 24/7 with speakers from all over the world. So I will be presenting full day training class, but it's actually split in 2 days so that people can still do other things. So November 31st, I'll be teaching the first half from noon to 4 p.m. Eastern. I believe that will be something like 3 p.m. to 7 Sao Paulo, maybe. Vitor can correct me later. And then the next day we do the other 4 hours. All right. So if you guys are interested, just search for Data Platform Summit 2020. You can see the whole list of classes. And like I said, I'll be doing one class as well in a couple of months. All right. So you're all invited. All right. Do we have any questions? Vitor.
Okay, Warner. No, we don't have any questions, but we have some great feedback here. Wow, everyone really loved your session. There is one from Carlos saying that it's a great feature. Yeah, it's a great feature, and he loved your demo.
Yeah. I mean, we can
And
talk a little bit about it just now in closing. People don't have questions. That's all good. You can send me questions if you think about something else later. I'll just have a couple of minutes. I will say, to be honest, I'm pretty impressed by Synapse. Like, and it's not people say like, oh, well, Vitor and this guy, they're MVPs. They have to say that it's good because otherwise Microsoft will, smack them in the head or something. No. It's not necessarily. If we have to criticize the product, we can criticize it. And it's not like they're going to kick us out of the program or anything. I've criticized SQL Server a million times over tons of things that it does that I think are dumb. But in this case, I think they did a good job. I actually think they did a really good job. If you look at what's out there, like obviously the 3 main competitors for Microsoft in terms of the analytics space is Redshift in AWS, it's BigQuery in Google, and it's Snowflake, which runs cross-platform, right? The only one that offers a kind of integrated experience like Synapse is Snowflake. And Snowflake doesn't have an embedded ETL like Data Factory, right? So for example, in Snowflake, if you want to do ETL, there's a little bit of capabilities you can do built into Snowflake itself, but it's all code-based. There's no graphical drag and drop with things here, right? It's not integrated. So usually you would need something external. Maybe you would use Azure Data Factory with Snowflake, for example. But then now that's a separate service, right? In Synapse, it's right there in the workspace, right? If you're using Redshift or you're using BigQuery, there is no concept of an integrated workspace like this, right? Now the question is, how soon is it going to be before Amazon and Google come out with their integrated workspace too, and they try to do the same thing that Microsoft is doing now, right? Because they're all always competing against each other, right? BigQuery came out with this idea of paper query, and then a few months later, Amazon said, wait, we have a service now for that. It's called Athena. Now you can just paper query. Don't worry about it. And then now Microsoft is introducing this SQL on demand as well, right? So it's always a competitive race to keep one winning over the other kind of thing. So it's always really exciting to see. I think Synapse is going to make some people sweat. So I think that's good.
Oh, now we have two questions, Warner. In fact, it's related to your training. Yeah, no, Sydney. Let me put Sydney. Sydney is asking about your training.
Yeah,
about
for sure.
The privacy details, and just put it again on the screen.
Yeah, let me put it on the screen again. Let me share my screen again real quick, and I'll show you guys right now. Share. Boop, boop. So can you see my screen again?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the link is dataplatformgeeks.com/DPS2020, and that's enough to get to the rest. You just have to then look for the training class and search for my name there. Right now it's $139 US. This is the full class plus the recording. So it's not only because it's virtual, then you can do the full class and then the recording. And the other thing I'm gonna do, it's not here in the description or anything. But what I'm thinking I'm going to do is everybody that joins the class, I'm gonna create a private Facebook group. So let's say if there's 20 of us in the class, I create a private Facebook group, and then, let's say you missed a few hours of the class and then you have questions after, then you can hopefully we can just make it really interactive. You can go on the Facebook group, ask questions there. I'm going to leave it permanent. So if you take the class, I'm always going to have the group there. And, if down the line you have a question, you want to shoot me a message, whatever, you will always have access to that as well. So that's something that I'm thinking of doing, so that every time in the future, if we do another training like this, I'm just going to add more people to that group until we have this big, nice group of data engineers, and we can just all help each other. So that's something that I have planned as well for it.
That's cool. And we have now I have a question. It's from Sydney again. He's asking your opinion about Databricks compared to Synapse Analytics.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I've been thinking about that a lot. And I think this is a big. You know how in like the movies, there's like two battleships, like in the old in like the naval, when they fight in the water, and then they're like loading cannons, and it's like right. I think this is like basically Microsoft has shot some big cannonballs at Databricks with Synapse, because man, it's very, very competitive product. It's like if I sit here and I say, okay, I'm gonna run in Azure, why would I pick Databricks today over Synapse, right? Okay, right now Synapse only lets me run one cluster. Yeah, but that's just a preview limitation. Let's assume they allow you to create multiple clusters when they go GA, which I think is pretty safe to assume. Again, why would I use Databricks? The notebook experience, it's a really good notebook experience in Synapse, and you already get access to all the other SQL stuff, right? The only thing that I think might be still in the edge of Databricks is there's a few percentage of people that might want to still run some of the proprietary stuff that Databricks has, right? So if you guys remember, Databricks is not just a nice management interface. The Databricks team has proprietary Spark code that they say, I've seen some articles. I'm not an expert. I've never done an actual benchmark of Databricks versus vanilla Spark. but they say they have redeveloped some of the processes in Spark to make them faster, right? And to run more parallel, and that they've made some of the algorithms faster, and they run the latest version of Delta Lake, for example, the Delta Lake table technology, where you can do ACID, you can do time travel and things like this. So if you want the latest version of that, then you have to go with Databricks. If you want just these proprietary super fast algorithms, if that's the truth, you have to go with Databricks. But how many companies really need that bleeding edge of technology, right? I don't know. You guys tell me. Out of 100 companies, how many do you think would rather just go with this integrated environment that is fully supported by Microsoft, that you don't have to worry or think about it, or they'd rather just go with Databricks, which is only Spark? It doesn't have any, SQL engine built in. It's not going to have the integration with ADF. It's not going to have the integration with Data Lake. It's not going to have the integration with Power BI.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think the selling in Azure of Databricks just got a little bit harder.
No, I totally agree, and I have the same opinion. Yeah. Cool.
This is
I
really
think
cool how you can see the Q&A. Is that a YouTube feature?
Oh yeah, no, it's you see, it's on Stream Yard. It's really cool.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. And then you
yeah,
can
it's
see
really
the
cool.
little avatar and yeah,
Yeah,
I love it.
it's really cool, right?
Yeah, I like it. Thank you for the question, Sydney, by the way. Awesome.
No, that was awesome, Warner. We don't have any other questions, but for sure, if anyone is still have doubts or want to reach Warner, man, do it, because he's doing so many great things on the
Feel free
data
to add
engineering
me on
field.
LinkedIn as well. I always add everybody on LinkedIn. So, and you can message me over LinkedIn as well. That's the easiest way to do it these days. Just Twitter or LinkedIn. You feel free to just add me on either one of those. And if you ever think of anything, just reach out. Yeah. And I'm thinking, now that we're talking about different DW engines, maybe I'll come back to the SQL Maniacs with a Snowflake showcase. I don't know how
Ooh,
popular
that's
Snowflake is in Brazil. So I don't know if it's very popular in Brazil or if it's not really known there yet, but in North America, it's getting really popular, Snowflake. So
really.
yeah,
I don't think it's the same here in Brazil, but it's a great idea. It's a great idea. Let's do it after your
yeah,
vacation for sure.
yeah, sounds good. All right,
Oh, thank you again, Warner. Thank you for your time, and man, it was
absolutely.
awesome again.
Good to see you guys. Until next time,
Until next time,
thanks
thank
for
you.
watching. Bye.
Bye, guys.